it's interesting that I have trouble remembering what I did 10 minutes ago, and I can do things from 30 or 40 years ago, and it's like, where'd that come from? Anyway, I don't even know if I have a title for this presentation. I went back in my notes and I read last month's Finding Happiness in the Middle of the Pandemic and Rejoicing in the Midst of Political and Civil Madness. Maybe we have part 2 with an addendum. I don't know. Carl, thank you for the hymns. It's nice to relax. The hymns were very relaxing this morning. It was very relaxing yesterday afternoon, spending the afternoon with Steve until Christy got home. You wanted a present, you got your present. There you go. No, we had intended on being over here at a certain time yesterday afternoon, and we got up, and Matt and I, my son and I, had to go to Home Depot to get some stuff that he needed. Notice he needed. And that was at 6 o'clock in the morning because they open at 6. So after breakfast and packing the car, it's like 9:30. Let's get out of here. So Helen, we just left. We got over here about 12:15 yesterday afternoon, and Steve was waiting in the front door. He was, as it looked, he was getting ready to walk back in the house as we come up the rise. So he turned around and waved to us, and it was nice to spend the afternoon and have supper with them last night. And the inside joke is when we left their facility after spending 3 months, we said we need to get together and do this, the weekend thing and have supper and whatnot. And I offered to bring the meat, and I asked him what meat he wanted. He said, anything but pork, I think is what you said. Something there was something there that was unkosher. And I quipped back in the text. I says, well, how about squirrel? And squirrel in quotes means tri-tip to us. We have this inside joke. So we brought squirrel and put it on the grill last night, and it was very tasty. The tri-tip was we really had a fun evening. Little glass of wine to go with it, and some really good conversation. So that has been a very nice respite from the activities that we normally have where we live now. October 12th, we moved into our son's house in a little bedroom and bath with 3 grandkids, and the 4-year-old is a terror on wheels. Let me tell you that. He rules the house. He demands attention. And although it's fun being around the family, it's not our home. And, any of you who have lived with relatives know what I'm talking about. It's a whole different lifestyle. You don't make the decisions, they do. And if a check needs to be written because they don't have the money, there's not much choice but to write the check. So we have been dealing with that. It has benefits. It has some things we don't care for, I guess. I'm trying to think of the right words to say nicely. But it was nice to be able to get out of the house and come over and enjoy a peaceful day or so with them. And to be here and speak with, be with you guys and enjoy a meal as well. Last year was a crazy year. I don't think anybody would dispute that. I've lived 71 plus years. I've been through, Vietnam War, been through pain and suffering because of accidents on the job, been through job loss, moving. Even, last year was at 70 was a pretty tough time trying to pack up a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house into a storage unit, because of job loss last year. Both of Helen and I both lost jobs. COVID, which is now, I think, COVID-19 A, B, and C, because we keep getting iterations of the sickness, the virus. That has people on edge. It has people isolated. It has people committing suicide. It has people being evicted. Companies closing down. All of those things that come with things like that. A divisive election. I'm thankful that I'm apolitical. You know, in November 74, when I got dunked in the tank and received the Holy Spirit and became a child of God, I quit being political. This is me talking. This doesn't represent anything the church teaches. This is just how I feel. I don't care who's in the office. When I was in the military, I served under 3 presidents. Some were left, some were right. Some were good, some were not so good. I'm not going to name names. It doesn't matter anymore. I serve the living God. And like Blake said last week, we know who wins, right? We know who wins. It doesn't matter who governs this country. God's going to take care of us. That's just how I feel. All the things that have taken place, people are afraid. I've already mentioned some of the reasons. But we do know the final outcome to human history. We know that Jesus Christ, our Savior, our brother, is coming back to this earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We know Romans 8 tells us that we are children of God and heirs. The will has been written. The names are already in the book. I mean, if we fail, it's our fault. It's there for the taking for us. We know that 2 Corinthians 15 talks about being ambassadors for Christ, reconciling people to Christ, just as we have been reconciled to Christ ourselves. So it seems then that as we look back at last year, to me, I think we're being sifted, not only as a church and as individuals with our beliefs, but the whole world is being sifted as well. I don't know a lot about what took place in Israelite days. You can get snippets in the Bible and sometimes on what we call Channel 13, where we live, independent TV. You'll get documentaries about how things were. And when the crop came in, the wheat crop came in, they would take to harvest to the threshing floor. And I'm assuming the ladies with their softer feet would walk around on the mat where all the wheat was, and they would crush the grains a little bit and take them away from the stalk, and you have wheat and chaff left, or grains and chaff left. And then you would put them on a mat and throw them up in the air, and maybe they had big blankets that multiple people pick it up. The grains would go up in the air and the chaff would get blown away by the breezes that were in place at the time. Did I just get a voicemail? I think I did. My phone just went off. And, they call that winnowing. And then the last thing that would happen when you take the grain and then you would put it in a sieve, and it had holes in it, and you shake it around, and pretty soon the grains would drop out, and what's left after all that happened would be maybe the grains with debris on them, mud or rocks, things like that. What you have is the good grain that can be processed into flour to be eaten. The rest is just tossed away. I worked in a construction industry for 8 years. Well, I worked in construction for a whole lot longer than that, but I worked the last 8 years that I actually had a good job before my wreck. I drove a truck, was a cement factory, concrete factory, made batch plants that made concrete for housing and roads and all that stuff. A lot of times we'd take the older bottom dumps out to a quarry, rock quarry. And you'd see, you drill in the rock, you put the whatever you're going to blow up stuff with, dynamite or whatever, and boom. We would go over and park in a line, trucks that were assigned for that. Big, giant machinery would dump big product, into those bottom dumps. You got to take them up a ramp, and you got to be at the right speed, otherwise you get stuck. You got to know what you're doing. And at the appropriate time, you would push the button or flip the switch, and the doors would open up and drop out the product. So you're leaving it in a windrow. Another big machine would push it off the embankment down a hill into machinery that was huge and loud and noisy because they were doing this to the product. to the rocks. And there's a crusher in there that's rolling around. You can hear it, bang, 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 crushing these big boulders into smaller rocks. And then the rock would fall through. Then a conveyor belt would take that to another machine, and it would crush it more. And pretty soon you had rocks that were 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/8, 3/4, 1.5 inches. And for those of you guys that know construction, you put certain things together and you make base rock for a driveway. Or if you needed something a little bit bigger, you'd use an 1.5 inch rock because it was stronger and it would last longer. You had sand of different quality. And you put all of those together, the sand, the aggregate, the cement powder, the fly ash powder. You put all of that together, mix it, and put it in a truck, and it goes out and puts it on the ground, and it becomes a building or a road or whatever. That process is what we're going through today, right now. We are being shaken. We are being tortured in some cases. We're not being tortured so much because of our religion, although I didn't watch the inaugural address, but I understand that there was a comment made about religious fanatics. And I got to thinking about that. Steve and I were talking yesterday because I hadn't heard that until yesterday. And I'm thinking to myself, what does he mean, our president, about religious fanatics? They're letting Islamics and Syrians and everybody else come back in now and took them off the no-fly list. Who are the fanatics? Is it going to be us? Someday, probably. So you look forward knowing what we know about the plan of God that's working itself out. One of these days, we are going to be the fanatics. So it almost seems to me like we are starting, just like the Israelites did in Egypt. One Pharaoh died, he was good. The next Pharaoh comes along, not so good, and things start happening. And they went through a period of time where the whole nation suffered, and then that was cut off, and then just Egypt suffered. I think we're sort of starting to feel that now to a degree around the world today, that the suffering is beginning. Bill Watson talked about that a year ago in one of the articles in the International News, and he went through some of the things that were going on a year ago. Well, you magnify all that now. COVID was supposed to be all gone in summertime, right? We were told it's gone. It's ramped up now and morphed itself into 3 new strains that who knows if the shot that we're supposed to be getting is going to take it away. 6 months from now, we may all be, again, having to stay home. We don't know yet. What else is going to come along down the pike? Last year we had a lot of fires, especially in California and some of the other states, and they were very bad. Loss of life, loss of buildings, loss of jobs. What's next? Major floods, hurricanes, I don't know. But to me, it should be putting us in the mind, yes, we've enjoyed a great run. 70 years, pretty good 70 years. We've not suffered. I've never gone hungry to the point that I was really hurting. I've always had a place to live, always had a job of some sort, always had transportation. My kids grew up and they're married with their own children. They have good lives. We've done pretty good. But I think now we're starting to see the wheels turning. And I don't know where in prophecy we are right now. Not exactly. But I feel as if we're starting to feel the pressure. Not only us as Christians, because knowing what we know about the plan, we know we're going to be impacted at some point, sooner or later. But the whole world's suffering. It's not just one group in one place. The whole world. And if you notice the news, we're not hearing a lot about Europe and Indonesia and Africa because we got so much going on now. The news seems to be focused more here than it does elsewhere. It's hard to find, at least I don't go all over the place looking. What's going to happen is going to happen. That's just the way I am. But there's a lot of things, and you hear it every now and then about what's going on in Europe, how bad it is. So we know stuff's happening. We know that we are in that process. At least I feel that way. And I want to go to Mark to begin, because the process was even going on back in Jesus' day. And he knew full well about that process. Mark 14. We'll start over here in verse 27. This is just before Jesus started going through the process of being hung up on the stake. Basically at Passover dinner, Jesus said in verse 27 of Mark 14, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." So he was telling them in advance. And you have to realize this, where the context is here. They're expecting, the disciples, they are expecting a king. They're expecting to win, to overthrow a Roman dictatorial government, a government that had already been there for well over 100 years. And they have a certain expectation in the physical sense. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to die, guys, and you're all going to stumble. Peter said, even if we're all made to stumble, I will not. So Peter's overconfident, the boisterous, thump his chest guy that was always in rumbles and tumbles in the bar or pubs or wherever they went for socialization. He would always be in trouble, having arguments. Jesus said in verse 30, "Assuredly I say to you," this is true, buddy, pay attention, "that even this night before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. He warned him. Jesus warned him that this was going to take place. See, it's interesting, the note that I have down here in my notes. You think back to Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall. Pride was Satan's downfall, right? He got proud. He thought Jesus' mercy was a failure, and he took advantage of it. There was a war in heaven. And it can be ours as well if we get overconfident. We're not in control. We're not making the decisions. God is. I'm learning that lesson now, living where we live. My son's in control. It's his house. He pays the note every month. It's his decisions on what he does. And it's the same thing with us. God is in control. He makes the decisions. If something needs to happen for the plan to keep going, we have to understand it and be willing to go through it. Otherwise, we take a chance of failing. I'm not going to do that. I'd never fail. Well, Peter did. Peter did for sure. Oh, let's see. So now let's go to Luke 22. We're going to go to the actual place where Jesus told Peter what was going to take place. Over in verse 31, Luke 22. Now, see, Simon had already taken Jesus, aside and said, "Look, dude, it'll never happen. You're not going to have to die. We're going to do this." And of course, he got rebuked. And later, here's what Jesus said to Peter. "Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you." Notice this. Asked. There had to be a conversation somewhere, right? When you think about this, Jesus had the Holy Spirit, obviously, a full measure, not the little measure we have. So he's able to communicate in the spirit world. Us, not so much, maybe. Peter had not the Holy Spirit at this time. But notice this. Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. Now, I've already gone through the processes. Sifting is the final process where it gets really rough on you because you're getting shaken and bounced around so that grain goes through that little hole down to the collection point where it can then be used for product. Bread, pizza dough, you know what I'm saying. Peter was at the verge of failure here. if his grain didn't fall through that hole. That's what Jesus is telling him here. Verse 32, I have prayed for you, Peter, that your faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, strengthen the brethren. Now, there's another thing about these two verses. In verse 31, the pronoun you is plural. You all will fail. And they did. They were scattered. Because the verse we just read is the shepherd's going to be smitten and the sheep be scattered. All of them failed that night. But he told Peter, I'm going to salvage you. I'm going to let you make sure you fall through that hole so that when you receive the Holy Spirit and you're given your ministry, you're going to be able to strengthen the brethren. Now that means a lot to us because our Father knows every one of us, even the hair on our head, even the ones that fall out because you start going bald. And as we thin, as we get older, he knows right down to the minuscule things about us. And he's able to salvage us from Satan's grip. Because even though we have the Holy Spirit and even though we know the plan of God for salvation of this entire world, we can literally stumble and fall to the point that we could get caught in the sieve and not go through. I mean, that's how close this race is. We've had a good run. Everybody in this room has had a good run. It's now starting to tighten up. The sieve has smaller holes every time it goes through, just like the rocks in the quarry. I remember as a kid, and this is back in late 50s, maybe real early 60s, everything got made from scratch, right? You didn't go and buy your Duncan Hines cake mix and throw it in the oven with an egg, stir it up and throw it in a pan and do it. No, my mom had to sift the flour. And by the time I got to be 9, 10, 11 years old, Dean, your turn. You got this coffee can looking thing and it's got this handle and you squeeze it and pretty soon you're changing hands. And again, because your arms are getting tired and it's taken forever to get the flour through this thing because the holes are so small and you got to go and you got to keep going. And finally, after what seems forever, 5 or 6 minutes maybe, you would empty that can out and that flour would have gone through that sieve and all be in the container that it was meant to go in, pure, fine, beautiful flour. And what was left inside, because production wasn't probably as good as it is today, you get little rocks and clumps and whatever else left in the sieve that didn't fall through. And that gets thrown away. The cake got made, the buttermilk biscuits got made. Where I come from in Oklahoma, you had biscuits every day. Homemade, fresh, every meal. And the gravy and the mashed potatoes and the roast beef and all the other stuff that went with it. And it all came from the labor of that hand squeezing that sieve. Well, guess what we're going through in this life? Somebody's squeezing the handle. Because we have to be sifted. We have to be processed down to the point that what's left is pure. This is flesh. What comes out the other end at the resurrection is the pure spirit body. That's what we're doing in this life, being processed. It's been pretty easy up to now. And I think things now are starting to get to that point where the sieve is starting to narrow down and only the best is going to come through. Let's go down to Luke 19. Back a few pages. You'll recognize this as the story of the minas. We read this a lot with its companion, the parable of the talents. But I want to notice a couple of things here. Now, this is worded a little differently, and it makes really more sense for us because we are Christian, and we do keep the Sabbath and the holy days, and we understand the commandments, and we understand about having to live a life of productivity spiritually, not making money. But notice a couple of things here. A certain nobleman, verse 12, went into a far country. So, Jesus, let's translate this as we go. Jesus is the nobleman. He's lived his life. He's going to die, be resurrected, and ascend to the heavens to sit at the right hand of the throne of God. Because he's getting ready to go into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and return. Revelation 19, marriage supper of the Lamb, right? Just before the return, Jesus receives the kingdom. And guess who's with him? His bride. Hopefully, that's all of us. See, that's the part of the plan that we know because we can read it. But you got to translate it into spiritualness because it's not a bunch of people clothed in suits and ties or armament. It's spirit beings coming out of the sky. And the leader, Jesus, takes care of the whole battle. We run through it. We're not going to get touched or not. You've all read the verbiage. That's what Blake was talking about last week. We know who wins. And we know what Satan's doing. So you have these two things warring in us. Do I want to be caught up in worldliness and who's president or who's not or this or that or whatever situation you might be in? Or where is our focus on Christ? Knowing that if Revelation 19 is true, and we hope it is, we're going to be with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords when he returns to this earth. So this is what Jesus is talking about. They didn't understand. We had the chance to understand now. Verse 13, so he called his 10 of his servants. Now, obviously, by now there's a whole lot more servants, right? Put yourself in this verse. He called us. We've been through baptism, right? We came to the knowledge of the truth. Our minds were constricted. We're sinners. We've prayed for forgiveness. We've been baptized. We've had hands laid on us, received the Holy Spirit. And now, according to Romans 8, we're children of God with an inheritance. And we have a job to do, 2 Corinthians 5:19, be ambassadors for Christ, as if he was speaking through us. See, the plan is sitting there lined out. Every bit of it. So he called his servants, delivered to them. In our case, he delivered the Holy Spirit to us. He delivered the plan of God for salvation to us. And said, do business till I come. Now we know what the parable talks about because they got a mina, which is about 4 months' salary, wages, which is a sum of money that they were supposed to use to increase what they had already. So whatever the servants were doing for the master, they had a position. They had responsibility. They might have had authority. Now he's given them a sum of money. Maybe they go out and buy land, farm it, buy, sell, continue, buy more land, hire more people. In physical terms, that's what you would think would take place. But in spiritual terms for Christians, what are we supposed to do? Understand Matthew 5, 6, and 7 for a start. That was what Jesus told the Jewish folks on the mountainside. That was what he expected of them. The proper attitude brings the proper behavior. And then you continue through the New Testament as it looks back at the Old, and you find out, wow, I need to be selfless, not selfish, and hold on to things. Which is why I love the first responders getting the little dolls or whatever to give to people that need it. Collecting clothing, collecting food for people who need it. That's selflessness. That's what we're expected to do, and do it happily. There's a donation in our car. We're going to bring it in afterwards because we feel that we've been so blessed we need to do that. And you guys are the same way. That's doing business till he comes for us. It's positive. It puts a check mark in a box somewhere on the line that says, put your name in the box. And if you do it selflessly and not begrudgingly, God blesses it. He takes the 2 mites that the widow gives and makes more out of that than he did the Pharisee that gave of his wealth and his posterity, because the trumpet blew and his entourage made sure that everybody saw what he did. You see, it doesn't matter how rich we are or what our place in life is. It's the attitude of doing something good for somebody else that gets the points. It's because we want to. We feel obligated and driven to do it. That's where we're at here. And we know the rest of the story. The folks that produced got 10 cities and 5 cities and so on. And the one that took it and wrapped it up in a handkerchief and put it away somewhere hidden had it taken away from him and given to the one who had 10 minus in productivity. And the upshot of the whole thing is, verse 24, he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10. But they said, Master, he's already got 10. Jesus countered, I say to you that everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Imagine being in the sieve and having the choice to do good or not, and not. Well, that hangs around you like a noose, and you don't go through the hole in the sieve to be a productive part of the kingdom, and you're thrown away. Imagine living 50 years as a Christian, going to church every Sabbath, and not getting to the point where you get through the hole. That's what I take away from this. We all have choices to make. You know, I make bad choices every day of my life. And yet, the lesson is those who are willing to give of themselves, much more will be given to them when Jesus comes back. Let's go over to Matthew 16. This is the third and final example of negative, and I've got a positive ending, I hope. Let's go to Matthew 16 and verse 21. All right. Matthew 16:21. From that time, which is near his time of death, he began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and raised the third day. And again, here we have this moment of light bulb come on spiritually for us now. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, that should never happen. You're supposed to be king. I'm supposed to be a chief of your guard or whatever, right? He's already got it planned out, what he wanted to do physically. But notice, Jesus said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're an offense to me, for you're not mindful of the things of God, but of things of men. Again, a moment of sifting. We all have to make the choice. We may all eventually give up our life. We were talking about it last night. Steve and I were talking. I was going to say squirrel, but I don't want anybody to misunderstand. The meat was on the grill, and it's dark almost, and we're standing out there and we're talking, and it's mist coming down. It was really nice, actually. And we were talking about end times. What's going to happen if we're taken in front of a tribunal and bow down to, or get killed, or suffer the consequences. And I said something to the fact that, well, yeah, they'd probably shoot me here and just chip away. He says, my thought is they shoot your wife, in front of you. And isn't there a verse in the Bible somewhere that says that? That they will punish everybody else to get you to recant and not say the words that you need to say. I will only serve God and worship him. Because eventually, whoever they are going to want us to bow down to an object and worship it and not God. And Peter's going, it'll never happen. It will. If we're alive, it will. Didn't know Morris. I have to qualify this. We've not known them very long. So not knowing what Linda has gone through and the suffering that she did, not really, because we weren't not around them much. I know it's hard for Morris to go through being by himself. I saw my dad go through it. And yet, she's resting in Christ, waiting the resurrection. It's like taking a nap. She closed her eyes and went to sleep. My mom did too. She died of ALS a long time ago. And it got worse and it got worse, and she wound up in the hospital, and we got a phone call one evening. She had passed. She just slipped away. And when my dad died, the church, and I'm not going to go back that far to say anything about that, but the church put him together with a widow. And they lived out their life in misery. But the night he died, she called me and said that just before Dad took his last breath, he smiled, and that was that. So you wonder if he saw something and smiled about it. Maybe he smiled because he wasn't going to be bothered by the missus anymore. I don't know. Or did he see the future? Did he see something there in his sleep just before he took his last breath? I don't know. If it were possible, it would be nice to go that way. But I don't know that we're guaranteed that. Because the farther we live into whatever's coming means that there's going to be a bigger risk of loss. And it may be around us, not just us. And I believe, and this is just me personally, we have to start getting ready now. You know, we're told to be prepared to give the speech, right? Be willing to defend yourself. Take no thought. It'll be given to you. But you have to live the life in order to be prepared. I once gave a sermon. Helen and I were talking about this. It was on trumpets. And I went through a litany, I guess you want to call it, of things that was going to happen before Christ came back. And one of the persons in the audience came up to me after services and the food was getting put out, and he says, "Well, thanks for scaring us half to death." And he was serious because he was looking at it in a physical way of thinking that it was going to be a long time before that happened. And really, he's probably right. He was in his 70s and he didn't live to see it. But I'm in my 70s and I probably might see it. That was, 20-something years ago when that sermon was given. But my problem is if we are not doing things now and we're worried about physicalness around us, when are we going to turn the switch on to become ready when it gets here, if we're not getting ready for it now? Again, that's just me. I have been impressed. I'm not perfect by any means, and I'm not ever going to give accolades for anything. I remember Mr. Chamberlain a long time ago now. We were talking after church, and to me, in my mind, he was my mentor. He was my spiritual guide because he was the pastor. I looked up to him and his wife because they were basically our spiritual parents, because our parents weren't involved in it. Her parents were never in the church, and my parents stayed with Worldwide till it went into Sunday. So we really didn't have anybody to bounce off of and to get, advice from. And Lauren and Patty did a good job. And he was sitting playing the piano. At 60-something, he was learning how to play the piano. So he was tinkering around. And I walked up when we were having a conversation. And he goes, "Dean, I really have a lot to change." And I'm in my 40s. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? you're perfect. Because he was my example. And now I'm at the same place and I'm trying to be what I thought he was because I need to be an example. Because my kids have told me I wasn't a very good example. They all slipped away and went to Sunday. Son's never really been interested in it at all. So there's an element of guilt there because the youngest daughter has been very vocal about my failures. Now, I don't know if that's a reflection of her failures or what, but it makes me think I have a lot of improvements to make still, even after 47 years or so. That's why I'm so reflective at this point, I guess. Because if we don't correct what needs correcting, it'll never get corrected in time. To that end, Colossians 3. This has been read many, many times, but I think it bears reading again, if for no other reason than I need to hear it, as an example for me to live my life. Verse 12. Oh, I'm in the wrong book. No wonder it didn't look right. Okay. The inscription, the title that I have for this paragraph is Character of the New Man. But the way it's written is in a very positive light. Because it says, therefore, brethren, given what has been written already, go back and read Colossians 1:2 to get to 3. Therefore, as the elect of God. Notice that. Right? We're in the sieve and we're being processed. And Paul is saying, therefore, as the elect of God. That means it's working. Whatever they were doing, whatever we are doing now is working. We're falling through the holes and making it, okay? It's not that we're failures. Yeah, we got a few things that we need to iron out maybe. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies. In other words, keep living the life. Take the lessons of Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Take the writings of Acts and all of the other books. Put them in your mind and understand living the life means something. It means selflessness, not selfishness. I don't need those 5 red t-shirts. I only need 2. Those 3 can go somewhere else, right? That's what it means. And I'm happy to give them up. Christy and I just had a little wink there. But Helen and I have done the same thing. And, with the move, we're doing it more. It's like I got a rack of clothes I never wear. I wear 2 or 3 t-shirts a week. I got a couple pair of jeans. I get them dirty. They get washed. I put them back on. Everything else just sits there. All the jerseys, all the 4 or 5 pair of really nice dress jeans. The cowboy boots are up here. I wear them every now and again. I didn't wear them today. I decided to be a civilian, not a redneck. I guess. I don't know. I know. Wins. Do you have your boots on? Good. You're representing. But I think you guys understand where I'm coming from and where we're going here. Let me finish. Put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering. Sounds like the Beatitudes, doesn't it? A little bit. Putting up with one another. Sometimes we have disagreements. You have to talk through them. Not every one of us are going to be joined at the hip on every item of everything in the Bible. There's going to be discussion. It's bound to be. We all have different processes that we go through. If anyone has a complaint, figure it out. Settle it and be done with it. What do? We hang on to him, right? He did this to me 20 years ago and I still haven't forgiven him. Do you think it's time to let it go? It's time. It really is. We've held, there's those of us, I guess I'll put it that way, who have held on to too much too long. It's time to let it go. Notice, even as Christ forgave you, so you must do. If you're living the life, here's the instruction. But above all, put on love, which is the bond of maturity. That means you're just about ready to fall through that last little bitty hole in the sieve and come out golden. Let the peace of God rule in your mind, to which you were called in one body. Notice it's one body, not an organization, not a shingle on the door, not a 503c, whatever it is. None of that. None of that. This is God's rules. It's spiritual, has nothing to do with physical plant or anything else. And be thankful. Be thankful. It's weird, at the time when I was injured on the job, I looked at that and I go, why am I going through this? Because I ached. I was black and blue and purple, and every organ in my body was bruised. I had broken bones. They've never been set. They're still all gnarled up. At the time, I couldn't understand why. Why am I going through this? And I look back now, and in a lot of ways, I have to be thankful, because there's things that happen in my life that have given me joy, even with all the stuff. They've given me joy, and I've been places that I wouldn't have gone. And after that were some of the best sermons I ever gave, when I look back and think. So you can't really hold a grudge, You got to go on with life. Be thankful. Verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in us richly in all wisdom. Because if it doesn't, we really can't live the life and have a success. Teach and admonish one another in psalms, which, again, Carl, thank you for the hymns we sang today. Perfect, spot on. I used to say I'm amazed. Not anymore. God knows what we need. Those were the hymns we needed today, because it put us in a mindset to really be with one another and enjoy the company. Admonish one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in our minds to the Lord. Worshiping God, thanking Jesus for his sacrifice, and trying to emulate his life in ours so that we can produce fruit, reconcile people to God, and as that last little grain falls through the hole, when we're risen, we're going to have a perfect spirit body. And all of whatever has taken place in our lives won't matter anymore, because we're going to have eternity. Who can define that? Right? Who can define that? We know the 1,000 years. You can kind of wrap your mind around 1,000 years. Methuselah lived 900 and something years. You can kind of get an idea of what that might be. And you read through, the prophecies in the Old Testament, and you find out how cities are rebuilt, and the trade and all the commerce and all the things that are going to take place physically that we're going to direct because we're spirit beings and administrate. You get an idea of how exciting life is going to be as a spirit being. Because we're not going to ever face death again. We don't have to worry about disease or being hungry or working 40 hours a week or 50 or 60 or whatever. We're going to be God, part of the God family. Have a name and a title and obligations, just like the Minas. We might have 10 cities. Me, if I get 1 or 2, I'm going to be thrilled beyond measure. Because if I'm able to drop through that last hole, I'll take those 2 and run with it and find out what happens at the end of the 1,000 years. If I'm profitable, who knows? I might get a galaxy, right? Go do this over here. Go make that for me. Because what comes after the 1,000 years is the new earth and the new heavens and a city, and only spirit beings inhabit that. what's left is, if we're going to have human beings after, it's all going to have to go somewhere else. And if we're part of the God family and we have that kind of authority and that kind of power to do it, imagine what we can create. All under the auspices of our Father and our brother, who is King of Kings and Lords of Lords. We'll start with the king of a city. We might be the king of a galaxy when it's all done. Wouldn't that be cool, you know? To plan all that and to think it out and to put it into motion. Verse 17, whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Christ.